we are, folks, back here for another Kdog movies. This time we're going to do a special tribute to an actor who just passed away recently. Academy Award winner and with a lifelong career spanning, ever since the 1960s. So, who am I talking about? The one, the only, Robert Duvall. So, this video we're going to take a look at some films that were, I don't know, maybe some milestones in Duvall's career, but definitely ones that stand out in my mind of how good he was as an actor. So we're going to begin things with this video from 1962, his first big on-screen role as Boo Radley in the classic To Kill a Mockingbird from 1962. And of course, Robert Duvall is not the main star of the film, but he definitely has a significant, even though small part, and it was his first big role as the character of Boo Radley. And of course, the main part of this movie is he's joined by Gregory Peck as Atticus Finch, and there's some. Of course, this was a huge film from 1962, and it's gone down as one of the greatest films ever made. As a matter of fact, Atticus Finch has gone on to the AFI's greatest hero of all time. So, strap in. We're going to take a look at, if you haven't seen it yet, gather everybody around, and I would encourage everybody, kids, family members, do have some word of caution that this is not a politically correct film, so there is going to be words used, not profanity words, but definitely words that it definitely takes on a different meaning now than what it meant back in 1962. So, without further ado, here's To Kill a Mockingbird from Universal Pictures. To Kill a Mockingbird has, over the years, gone down as one of the most important films of our history, as well as a favorite of mine and a favorite to many other people, just because of its subject matter. And, of course, the book is also on several award-winning lists, but also, unfortunately, it has also been banned in some places because of what it depicted. But the theme I always take away from this story is that people can be cruel, so cruel to each other, and that usually the people who sometimes the people that we tend to demonize are not really the monsters at all. So Bob Ewell, who's the villain in the film, look at what he was doing. He was kind of masquerading at first as the guy who's doing good. But we know as the audience that he wasn't. He shows up drunk and called a vicious name to Atticus Finch. And even spits on him at another time, and just, yeah, he's just a horrible human being. While you have Tom Robinson, who is just a man doing good work, helping Ewell's family, but they had evil plans to trap him, to say that he done something to the daughter. I can't say it on YouTube for various reasons. He took advantage of her. That's, but he didn't. He was just being a good Samaritan, and yet gets accused of such horrible stuff. And then you have the character of Boo Radley, who is told that he's a maniac, he's crazy, he's a monster, he's gonna do some horrible things to his parents. Well, it's his parents and the gossipers around town that's demonized him. And in the midst of that, you have this one man, Atticus Finch, who tries to make sense of it all and raising his children and say, hey, there's a lot of evil in this world, but I got to make sure that we are the light in that dark world. And yeah, that's a thing I think is so wonderful about, let alone the film adaptation of this story, is that it's a story. Well, even in the book, I'm just going to cite the book as well, because I have read the book and as well as seen the film. The story is this horrible time in our history, and unfortunately, we haven't come out of it. Is this horrible ugliness that we have as humanity, seen through the eyes of children. And that's what I think is so genius about the way Robert Mulligan directed it, the way Harper Lee wrote it in her book, and Horton Foote adapted it into the screenplay, is that it's this horrible thing seen through the eyes of children, but it looks, there's things to learn from that, and there's a brightness and there's a hope that is to be learned from this whole situation, is that, hey, there is a lot of evil in the world, but it's how do we adapt and overcome that. And I think that's why, to me, it has become one of my favorite movies of all time. It's one of my favorite stories of all time. Gregory Peck won the Academy Award for Best Picture, not Best Picture, but Best Actor, for his role of Atticus Finch, and he's also said that it is his favorite role that he ever played. And also the AFI named Atticus Finch as the greatest hero in film history. So, out of all the superheroes and all the swashbucklers and that you can think of in film history, Atticus Finch is the greatest hero in film history. But To Kill a Mockingbird is such a great movie, and it needs to be handed down over the years. And here's another thing that is so wonderful about that movie. I don't know if it was a budgetary issue or if it was a creative issue, but creatively, I think it works as a black and white film in 1962, because by that time, color had been the standard of films. But here, this was shot in black and white. But the film needs to be in black and white. It's because there's no other way to depict it. It shows the grittiness of the Deep South in 1932, So you feel the atmosphere with there being no color. Okay, next up we're going to take a look at a film that was made or released in 1976, and this is one that I don't know if Duvall is necessarily recognized for this one, but he's more recognized probably for The Godfather. But I chose this one because I think it's an important film. I've already talked about this film I've talked about it before, and it's kind of it's one of those movies that over time it changed what it was about, and it's kind of taken on almost taken on more of a sinister depiction of what it was about. But at the time, it was kind of laughed at by the professionals who were dealing in this field. Well, what am I talking about? It is Network from 1976. Now, this is the new Criterion Collection Ultra 4K HD version. This is the only way that the movie will see Ultra 4K HD as of right now. Thankfully Criterion is the one that's picked it up, because I think Criterion being a boutique label, and surprisingly, there's not a whole lot of extra features. They just ported over what that Warner Brothers and Laurent Bouzereau produced for the 2011 Blu-ray, I believe. But that's what it's ported over. But there's a new documentary film all about Paddy Chayefsky, who wrote Network. And so Robert Duvall in this film plays the character of Frank Hackett. He's a bit more of a darker character than Boo Radley, playing the network executive who's all about the corporate structure and hoping to turn the network around and turn profit. And one of the things that you should know about television, at least at that time, the news departments were not necessarily a thing to make money off of. I'll get into that after the feature film. But Duvall is joined here by Faye Dunaway, William Holden, Peter Finch, and a few other people. But directed by Sidney Lumet, produced by Howard Gottfried, released by MGM and United Artists in 1976. Here's the Academy Award-winning film, Network. So that was Network from 1976. It was a very big Academy Award-winning film. I'm trying to think. Duvall didn't win anything, I don't think. But definitely Peter Finch, who played Howard Beale, he won after just a few days after his death. Faye Dunaway, Beatrice Straight won Best Supporting Actress just for a few minutes in this film. And the thing with this movie is it's a very outrageous movie. It's, at the time it came out, it was kind of looked at as a satire film. And it was a very, just kind of laughable at the idea of what was being paraded around in Network. Not so much today. Because today we live in the society of cable news and things of that nature. Cable news, podcasting, and so on and so forth. And so they, you turn on cable news, just the idea presented in 1976 about the network news being shifted from news over to entertainment programming. That was a completely that was an idea back then that everybody just was like, what? That makes no sense. Walter Cronkite had some Walter Cronkite was asked about the movie Network at one time, and he said that the idea of network news being put into programming was just completely absurd. You know, the news divisions were always a money pit. It was always something that was hemorrhaging money. It was not meant to generate ratings. Now you look at what goes on in television now, with especially with cable news and podcasting now. They are forms of entertainment. And I mean, turn on CNN, turn on MSNBC, turn on Fox News, all of them. That's a form of entertainment. And even they are tilted to one side or the other in terms of their politics. You know, back in the day, you didn't know what Cronkite's political association was, but you know who like Sean Hannity or Anderson Cooper or Rachel Maddow or any of these people, you know who they're affiliated with. Isn't that crazy? But yeah, this was from 1976, and Patty Chayefsky was onto something about, you know, where television was heading. You know, and back in the day. So with that, yeah, do check it out. It's very haunting in some of the scenes that's in this film. I mean, it's directed by Sidney Lumet, and even though Rocky had beat it out for the Best Picture, but if Rocky wasn't in the equation, Network, I think, would have won the Best Picture, no doubt, because it's the trailer and the film said the trailer was, it said, prepare yourself for a perfectly outrageous motion picture. And you get that. You get that from Faye Dunaway's character, Diane Christensen. You get it from Robert Duvall and the Frank Hackett. You get Peter Finch as Howard Beale. You get even Ned Beatty's short scene as the chairman of the board, Mr. Ruddy. Oh my gosh, that scene where he chastises Beale and saying, "You have meddled with the primal forces of nature." Yeah, I mean, that just sums up the whole thing right there. So, with that, let's go on to the next feature. Alright, so we're going to move on to the next film with this tribute to Robert Duvall. So we're going to take a look at a film from 1997, I believe, is when this came out. This is a film that Robert Duvall himself wrote, acted, and directed himself. So, from October Films in 1997, it is the film The Apostle, a little independent film that he made. And this film, I've seen it several times. We're going to meet a character by the name of Sonny, who's this very charismatic preacher who has some flaws with him. The film also stars Farrah Fawcett, Billy Bob Thornton, and also a young Walton Goggins, you know, from The Righteous Gemstones and Justified. He's in this film, as well as Miranda Richardson. So, from October Films in 1997, here is The Apostle. Well, that was The Apostle from 1997, a little indie film that Robert Duvall wrote, directed, and starred in. And it's a decent little film. Now, this film is not a... I don't want to say it's a family-friendly, faith-based film by any stretch, because even though it just happens to have a character who is a charismatic, Pentecostal-like preacher, where the film takes the dark turns is that it shows that the man he's got his own problems, and he's sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and what happens in the film is that we have this character by the name of Sonny. Sonny Dewey is his name, and we see very early in the beginning that he is very, very charismatic preacher. He goes all over the world. He tours all over the world, going to various parts of the United States and to the different parts of the world to evangelize and spread the gospel. But we also see... We don't see it, but we hear about it later on that he has had, when you're traveling, he's possibly had an affair somewhere. And so he's back home. His wife she's fallen out of love with him, and has started up a relationship with the youth pastor of the church, who is single. And of course they had two kids together, the pastor and the wife. They had two kids together. And so, but Sonny, the pastor, the wife has taken... Not only is she wanting a divorce, she's wanting him kicked out of the church, and she's gone through the proper channels to have him removed as the head pastor of the church. And so that happens. But this angers Sonny, and he's blaming it all on his wife. He's blaming it all on the youth pastor. And so he decides to take it upon himself, and he shows up in kind of an embarrassing way to her by showing up, placing $100 bill in his pocket, in the pocket of the new pastor, and who's the youth pastor, and just dances all out. And then, but however, that rage is still there. He taunts them at night, and the ultimate thing he does is, during a church baseball game, he decides to get into a confrontation with the youth pastor and take a baseball bat to him. Thus committing a crime. In the long run, the youth pastor ends up dying because of that. He knocked him pretty hard. So Sonny figures out that, hey, they're going to come looking for me, but I'm going to start new. And so he takes his car, drives it into a river, floods it, and goes to this little town in Louisiana called Bayou La Batterie. This is a little town in Louisiana. And eventually he meets a few people and says, you know what, I want to start a church here. I need to start a church here. And then he meets up, not meets up, but he rededicates himself to the Lord and meets up with Pastor Blackwell, who's a retired pastor. He had to retire because of health reasons. He had 2 heart attacks. He had some I believe it was heart attacks, and so he was told that he had to give up serving in ministry. And so while he's also there in Bible Baptistry, he takes on various jobs. They find a church, restore it, gather a congregation, starts putting it together, and it grows. And it grows. But, and this is the thing with sin. I'm going to tie this into a little message to you. That's the thing with sin. No matter what, no matter if you have not repented of that sin, eventually it will be brought to the light. And so in this case, he murdered a man. And thinking that nobody would find him, eventually they do find him. There's a segment at the end of the film they show where the radio station that Sonny has been broadcasting from all of a sudden just starts to make its way somehow into Texas. The wife picks it up and is able to tune in just to hear a little bit of it. That's where Sonny is. She calls the local authorities and has him arrested. And of course, at the end of the film, the end of the film is Sonny. They let him carry out his sermon, his church service, but once the service is over, he said, I got to turn it over to Brother Blackwell. He said, I love you, and the Lord loves you, but I've got to move on. I got to go. And he's arrested, but even at the tail end, he's still preaching the gospel. He's still preaching the gospel. So, like I said, it's not a faith-based film, but faith and God and Jesus are a part of it. They are characters in the film, but it's not a faith-based film. It's not like I Can Only Imagine or any of those films, because this film shows that, hey, there's some a lot of these men of the cloth that we do hold in high regard, they're maybe not always who we think that they are. They have, just because they are maybe pastors or priests, they're still sinners. They are men. Because the Bible says, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But that does not mean that they cannot be forgiven and that God cannot use them. Because even they show at the end of the film, he's in prison, but he's become a trustee, and he's still evangelizing and leading lost souls to the Lord. So, and what Sonny does is wrong. It's 100% wrong. Not only is they don't show the marital affairs, but they talk about it, and what they do show is the murder. He took a baseball bat to the youth pastor and just swung and hit him because he's that type of angry person. And it's terrible. That's the thing with sin, folks, right there. You can, no matter what sin you've committed, you can run, you can hide, but eventually it gets brought to the light. It does. It will be brought to the light. That's even if here on this world, while you're here in this world, or after that, it will be exposed. So that's that. And my first encounter of this film, I remember reading about it in the newspaper, because back in the day, for they used to print movie ads in the newspaper, and I remember seeing that and just like, well, what's that about? And some time went on, and then eventually my family put in satellite TV, and one of the channels that we had for the longest time was the Independent Film Channel, IFC, when they played strictly indie films. And I was able to catch The Apostle, or set the VCR to record it at the time. Yes, it was still VCRs we were using back in the day to record the movie. And I took it back home I took it back down to college, and I watched it. I thought, this is a pretty decent story. Nothing big about it. It's nothing. It's nothing huge. I mean, it's strictly a indie film, but it's it's got a good story that's behind it, and it would not be anything that would sell, a major blockbuster for, but it's a decent film. So don't pick it up if you're looking for a faith-based movie, but it does have the power of redemption in it. There's some moments in it that, Jesus saves, but it also does unfortunately show the hypocrisy of the fallen man. That, hey, even your pastors and your preachers, there's stuff going on behind the pulpit that you don't know about. But that does not mean that they themselves cannot be redeemed and used for God's glory. So, with that, let's move on to the next film. Okay, so we're going to wrap up our salute to Robert Duvall with the next film that we're going to take a look at. We're going to take a look at a film from 1982 in which reunited him with To Kill a Mockingbird To Kill a Mockingbird screenwriter Horton Foote, as well as won him the Academy Award in 1983 for Best Actor, Tender Mercies. So, this one reunited him with Horton Foote to tell this story about this country music singer that loses it all and finds out what's important in life. So, from Universal in 1982, directed by Bruce Bursford, screenplay by Horton Foote, Tender Mercies. Okay, so that was Tender Mercies, released back in 1982. It was officially released by Universal Pictures because Universal had recently picked up the independent film company Associated Film Distribution that came around the late 70s and early 80s, but Universal had finally taken over them, and so Tender Mercies was one of those films that was released by Universal, but the film was produced by EMI Films, which was a company owned by Barry Spikings. Also, they owned the record labels Capitol Records and several other labels throughout the years. But this was a film that came out in 1982, in which Robert Duvall won the Academy Award for Best Actor in 1983. And this is definitely a redemption type story because it's about a person who's gone through a divorce, lost everything. He's lost his marriage. He's lost his money. He's lost his fame. The only thing that's really keeping him in the public consciousness is his ex-wife, Dixie, who's a country music star, still making a success, but she's making a success out of his songs just by singing them and keeping them alive. And then there's also the daughter that he never had any relationship with when she was a baby, and all of a sudden she starts to come back into his life, and she's played by Ellen Barkin, and his daughter, his name is Sue Ann. She wants to know who her father is, and so, but there's tragedy that strikes there because eventually he loses her in an automobile accident, but her husband survives. This is definitely about redemption, about forgiveness, and because eventually, because at the film, Mac remarried. He married Rosalie, played by Tess Harper. She has a son. Now, her story is she lost her husband during the Vietnam War and became pregnant with their son, Sonny, while the husband was away in Vietnam, and she was going to tell him when he got back that, hey, you have a son, but that's not what happened. He was killed, and still they don't know whether what happened to him. They just know he was killed. And also there's this struggling country band that's they're up and coming, and there's a record label that really wants them, but they're not entirely pleased, but Mac gives them a couple songs to sing. Hopefully that would take care of it, but it wasn't enough. So eventually he has to get back into the spotlight, and that's part of the story, is that he lost everything. And so, but it's redemption. They want him back. They want him back, and with this new group. This is a decent film because it definitely talks about, because it shows Mac dealing with alcoholism and the struggles of anger, and how he was with his wife, or his ex-wife. At one point he tells his daughter what happened. They had to leave because it was violent. It had turned violent, and he almost tried to murder her, but didn't do it. But yeah, and unfortunately, Tender Mercies is a movie that's it did not do well at the box office, but it garnered some critical praise. Let's see. It won Best Original Screenplay for Horton Foote, as well as Robert Duvall winning the Best Actor Oscar. But the film did not do very well in terms of box office, and so over the years it's gathered a kind of a cult following, and is still looked upon on DVD, obviously. Of course, Lionsgate has the rights to the DVD rights to the film. Studio Canal is the main owner of the rights to the film. Because like I said, it was distributed by Universal here in the United States, but they did not produce the film. It was EMI Films. And of course EMI Films has long dissipated. In some of their films, it was The Deer Hunter, Close Encounters of the Third Kind are some of the films that they've produced, but they eventually focused more on music, and then the music was bought out. Like all the record labels were bought out by Universal Music, and so that's the way it is. So that was Tender Mercies from 1982, thus celebrating some of the films of Robert Duvall and some of the films that he's been in. We didn't even get into Apocalypse Now or The Godfather, and I feel like those are I felt like those were going to be the films that people were really going to talk about, but I did talk about one in particular, which was To Kill a Mockingbird. Now, stay tuned. I have one more film I want to talk about that's not related to Robert Duvall that came out a couple weeks ago onto streaming. It has now premiered onto DVD that I do want to talk about. Okay, so the next film I want to talk about just came out onto DVD this week. It premiered 2 weeks ago on streaming. It's a little indie film documentary from Virgil Films, IndieCan Entertainment, and Redwater Entertainment. It is the documentary She Was Here. This is the documentary telling the heartbreaking story about what happened to child star Heather O'Rourke. Now, this film is not very long. It's only 83 minutes in length, and the whole film is about what she was like as a child. They show some family photos, they show some home videos and movies that of Heather, and there's also some interviews with some of the fellow cast members like Craig T. Nelson, Jo Beth Williams, who were in the Poltergeist films with her, as well as Zach Galligan, whom they made a TV movie with together, and Gary Sherman, who was the director of Poltergeist 3. Now, it really is heartbreaking to know what actually happened, and they talk about the heartache still goes on. Of course, when you lose a child, it's the film mostly chronicles the sister, her sister, mother, and a couple of school friends who loved her dearly, as well as some of the cast members I mentioned. But and there was also it also talks about the so-called the poltergeist curse. Okay, it gets that on the table, and that was something that the trade papers frothed up. And there has been deaths throughout the series of the making of those films. Like, for example, Dominique Dunne, who played the older sister in the original Poltergeist film. She was strangled to death by a psychotic boyfriend. He was crazy. And in Poltergeist 2, Julian Beck, who played the evil Reverend Kane, and Will Sampson, their deaths, they had illnesses. Julian Beck was ill with stomach cancer, but no one knew it. No one knew that he was ill until he actually passed. And it did give Julian Beck this otherworldly appearance when you see the film, and it's downright scary. But then Poltergeist 3 was Heather O'Rourke. Now, what Heather died of was a blockage in her intestines, intestinal stenosis. It was a birth defect that she had had since she was born. And I believe the film said that originally she was supposed to have a twin, but the twin didn't make it, and but Heather survived that pregnancy. But it was a birth defect that she had, where there was a blockage in her small intestines, and she would she found there'd be days where she would be sick to her stomach, and it was misdiagnosed as Crohn's disease. And then the doctor, the day that she passed, the doctor said we would have been able to save her had she not gone into shock or cardiac arrest. And they showed this is what was going on. They showed the X-ray. She was completely blocked in her intestines. But it was misdiagnosed as Crohn's disease from another hospital. And her mother states that in the film that afterwards she did sue the hospital for malpractice, but the hospital did whatever they could to protect themselves by changing lawyers, and then there was the press machine that just tore her down and just started making up stuff that wasn't true. And that's where supposedly the poltergeist curse came from. And also in like the recent 20 years of the internet, that added further to that, and saying that Heather was the example of child, where adults are messing around with young children, which was not true. She never was anything like that. The only thing that they did talk about was that after the movie Poltergeist came out, she was getting fans that were misbehaving fans, like the ones that went a little too close. And of course the family lived in a campground. In their first few years, they lived in a campground in California, and they were happy. They were happy with what they were doing. They were happy with the way that they lived, and that's okay. I mean, they were a happy family, and they were blessed with what they had, even though that was living in a camper and in a RV park. They were happy. They were a happy family, and it was just the way that the press and the media and how people can take things, turn it into things that it's not, and just that's how lives are completely destroyed. It's enough that the woman lost her child, and they do talk a little bit about, you know, what did she want to be when she grew up. She wanted to be that she did want to become a director, a filmmaker and director, and who knows? Who really knows what Heather O'Rourke would have been like today? You know, she could have directed a Marvel movie, or you know, become a big star. She was a star back as a child star in the 80s, but there was but when she passed, unfortunately, the media just took it and created a bunch of tabloid hoo-ha that was not really true. Even her sister Tammy was in films. Her sister Tammy was was more of a dancer, and Tammy was in films like Pennies from Heaven. And that's how they met Steven Spielberg, because Pennies from Heaven was a MGM release being filmed at MGM, and that's the deal with Poltergeist was being set up at MGM. And because Spielberg could not make Poltergeist at Universal, his home studio, that was part of the deal with him making E.T. So, and that's how they met. They were on break from Pennies from Heaven, and then here comes Steven Spielberg wandering into the MGM commissary, starts talking to Heather, and here comes the mother, and they start talking. They really didn't know who he was until they walked into the office and saw the posters of Close Encounters and Jaws. They're like, "Oh, you are who you say you are." But yeah, and also the sister Tammy was in Annie. She was one of the orphans in Annie. But now the family lives normal lives now. They've walked away from the business and just works normal lives, and I don't blame them. And it's heartbreaking to know what happened to Heather, and but she was buried. I can't think of the cemetery, but it's one of the famous cemeteries in Los Angeles, to where most of actors and singers are buried. MGM paid for her funeral, because it was a tragic loss to not only them but to the family. So yeah, this was a fairly well-made documentary. If you can punch it up on Amazon Prime, Fandango, basically all the streaming outlets, do check it out. And the film was called She Was Here, directed by Nick Bailey. So yeah, do check it out. It's a fairly well-made documentary about a child whose life was tragically cut short because of health, and and also the tragedy of how cruel the media what the media can do to one person's life, and just in order to get eyeballs to a screen. Even back in the 80s, before social media, and even after social media, because they talk about that and how people just make up rumors about stuff that's just not there. So that's it for this video. We're gonna close it down. I'll be back sometime soon with another one. We're going to take a look at some more films. I'm not sure what I have planned, but yeah. So, from me to you, see you later.